When the Yu-Gi-Oh! Early Days collection released a few weeks ago, there was one glaring omission. Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories. A fan-beloved game with some of the most interesting and janky gameplay, mainly due to the fact that it was released before the game had official rules. I've always wanted to do a Forbidden Memories run, but the insane amount of grinding has always put me off. That was until YouTube started randomly showing me Forbidden Memories challenges and got me motivated to give it a try. So what type of cards are we going for today? Well, the game includes several hidden subclasses of cards, and one of these is the female archetype. Functionally, this just exists for compatibility with certain equipped spells and a very select few fusions, but today, being International Women's Day, there's no better day to ask. Can you beat Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories with a female-only deck? The rules this time are pretty simple. My deck can only contain monsters of the female type. Equips, spells, and traps are all fair game. I can only fuse into female cards. And I must obtain at least one copy of a card legitimately before I can buy more or trade in other copies. Before we begin, I'd just like to note that due to the sheer volume of footage that's used in this run, the duels will be playing at double speed in the interest of not having a 2-hour video. Our story begins in ancient Egypt. Prince Lyra has decided to shirk his studies in order to go and play children's card games with his friends. Now where have I heard that one before? It's here that we hit our first snag. You see, the starter deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories is somewhat random. You get a specified pool of cards assigned to you based on a character name, frame of input, and a few other miscellaneous factors. As such, while our deck does contain Raigeki, we don't actually have any female cards. To get around this, I started the game over and over and traded any female cards I had to my completed save file on a secondary memory card. Then, when I was done, I traded over 3 copies of each female card I got to the main save. As you can imagine, this was rather tedious. But when we're done, our deck looks like this. Now this may seem rather powerful to start, and believe me, it is. But bear in mind, we don't really have any fusions available to us beyond Dark Witch, meaning one of the game's core mechanics is effectively useless to us. A core mechanic this game expects you to master. Our first match is against Simon. Being the literal first opponent in the game, his deck is rather lackluster, apart from the amusing possibility of him having all 5 pieces of Exodia in his card pool. Beyond that though, none of his cards really even come close to our lowest attack value, meaning we have a pretty one-sided beatdown on our hands. Unfortunately, a lot of the early game in Forbidden Memories is like this, as it has some rather skewed difficulty. So while we fight, I best explain a little bit about this game. Forbidden Memories uses what has become known as junior rules, meaning you can only play 1 card a turn, but in addition, it's got a rather robust fusion system that lets us fuse any number of cards in our hand together. The fusion system is rather complicated to understand and best left to the player to experiment with, but over time you get a good understanding of what fuses and what doesn't. If a card doesn't fuse, well then one of the cards ends up discarded, which can be an effective method if you drew a bad hand, since you'll always draw back up to 5 cards each turn. We hit up the local duel ground to find our friends and get some optional duels over and done with in the meantime. Teana's up first, but she's equally as easy as Simon, with her average card attack only being in the 500 range. Now, in addition to the fusion system, you can also use equipped cards as part of a fusion chain. This can be very helpful for setting up powerful monsters in a single type challenge. The female archetype happens to have a decent number of compatible equipped spells to choose from, most of which are already in our deck. Every card also comes with its own fully modelled 3D battle animation, which can be seen by pressing square to attack rather than X. Each card also has 2 separate attacking animations based on which Guardian Star you chose to set the card with. Guardian Stars are basically a primitive form of advantage system. Each star has one that it's strong against and another that it's weak to. resulting in a 500 attack boost for the favourable side. This means you also need to keep in mind the opponent's likely Guardian Stars to prevent surprising losses. But for the most part, it's not something you need to worry too much about. Villager number 1 is our first of the more generic duelists in this game. His deck, while certainly a step up from Teana, is still only putting out weak monsters on average. These early duels really are just here for the player to get used to the game's somewhat unique mechanics before things start to ramp up. But given the fact that we're starting with an above average deck overall, for now we only really need to worry about throwing out monsters, and not really if we can overcome our opponents. Villager 2 might be the first duelist that's actually worth talking about. With an average attack value of 1000, his cards are actually able to overcome some of our weaker monsters, if we're not careful. As he also implied, he has access to some rather devastating rare cards, chief among which is the 2200 attack Jirai Gumo. Thankfully, 9 times out of 10 you will never see anything above 1200, but it's a sure sign that not everything is going to be as easy as initially presented by this game. Thankfully, this time we got off very easy, letting us take the win. Villager number 3 has more or less the same card pool as Villager 2 did, but frankly in my experience he seems to have much worse RNG with his deck than Villager 2. While he still can pull out the nightmare that is Jirai Gumo, I don't think I've ever seen him pull out anything that's over the 1100 range before. And even if he did pull out some of the higher attack monsters, since our average attack power is so high, he would likely just throw it in defense position anyways, so it's not really that big a threat. Within no time, we claim our victory. Going with Teana to the local festival, we see our good friend Jono doing what he does best, losing to Seto. However, we seem to have caught Seto's attention, so we agree to duel him a bit later on. To pass the time, we go back to the duel grounds with Teana and Jono. Jono is decidedly a step down in difficulty again. We've gone from an average attack of 1000 back down to one of 500. Granted, Jono is one of the first duelists you're likely to see doing fusions of his own, but it's so infrequent that you may as well be fighting Teana again. Granted, Jono is the first duelist that has rewards that some players may wish to grind out in free duel afterwards, as he's a decent source of a good amount of components for one of the best fusions of the game, Twin-Headed Thunder Dragon, as well as dropping a decent few equipped spells and the field spell Sogen. But none of these are of interest to us this time. Just as we finish our duel with Jono, the big cheese himself comes in. Seto is the first skill check of the game. He's able to drop monsters with an average of 1600 attack, and can very easily fuse into cards of a similar value as well. He's not to be underestimated. For the first time, we're actually having to rely on our decent range of equipped spells to keep his monsters in check. But once you stick a 2100 beautiful headhunters on the field, Seto goes into full defensive, meaning you only really need to worry about the few bad matchups we have versus certain Guardian stars. But even that's not really that much of a worry in this duel, as we're kind of just steamrolling his monsters. Not that you should get used to that. This game has a habit of humbling you very quickly. From here on, we're gonna have to play more strategically, especially since it's gonna be a long while before our deck gets any upgrades. But in the end, we drop a Raigeki for the win. Heading back home, we turn into rest. But it's right around now that Heishin and his High Mage army decide to stage a coup. Seto and his gang barge in and take our servant hostage, as we're informed that Heishin has also taken the King and Queen hostage. We can exchange their lives for the Millennium Puzzle. The very item poor Simon here got so beat up to protect. As we turn to run away, we get blocked by the descendant of Jafar from Aladdin, the High Priest Heishin. Heishin is a cruel joke. For starters, he has home field advantage with the duel starting with Yami in play, meaning all of his cards are getting a boost. Not that he really needs it, because Heishin has access to some of the best cards in the entire game. This duel was designed to crush your confidence and force a loss. Even if you somehow win, you're forced to duel over and over again until you lose. To add insult to injury, Heishin here is the drop source of 95% of the cards we're going to use to upgrade our deck. Meaning our long-term goal is to get to the point where we can beat him. Even if it's only one time out of 100, we need to be able to win against him if we're gonna get to the end of this run. But unsurprisingly, at this point, we just get stomped into the ground. Beaten down, we have no chance to save ourselves, so we opt to shatter the Millennium Puzzle. Oddly, this doesn't end in our death, but instead locks our spirit away within the puzzle to one day be found by a boy named Yugi. Yugi, as it happens, is at the Yu-Gi-Oh! World Tournament, a collection of premier duelists from around the world. Our first opponent of this tournament arc is Rex. I decided to bully this Jurassic junkie by pulling out a whopping 3100 attack Headhuntress. Then, to add insult to injury, I boosted her to 4100 on turn 2 in an effort to get this duel over and done with quickly. Rex overall has a mix of both strong and weak cards. His dinos are around 1500 and can be boosted with Raised Body Heat and Wasteland, but the rest of his deck is full of generic fluff that's on Teana level. As such, we play a third monster and attack for game. Weevil has his signature bug deck, which once again has access to the fearsome Jirai Gumo, in addition to a range of equipped spells and the Forest Field spell. But unsurprisingly, a lot of bug cards tend to be on the weaker side, barring a few notable exceptions. He also has access to a bunch of generic monsters with an average attack of 1300 or higher, but they still pale in comparison to our beautiful Nightmares, especially when properly buffed. This means that Weevil is constantly on the defense, letting us force our way to round 3. Mai Valentine has access to a wide range of powerful monsters, including her signature Harpy Lady Sisters coming in at a base 1950 attack. She also has access to a lot of the cards we've been using up till now, like Beautiful Headhuntress, Electro Whip, and Cyber Shield, meaning we can't let our guard down around her. Growing up, she was always the roadblock that stopped me from getting too far in this game, and it's quite easy to see why. In this duel alone, she was pulling out monsters with 1800 attack quite regularly, and it could easily get a lot worse should she draw any compatible equipped spells. But with the amount of equipped spells that we have, we can easily overcome the majority of the dangers of her deck. Add on 2 Raigekis in hand, and we can quite easily nuke her lineup, letting us progress onwards. Against Bandit Keith, we get to crack out one of the only fusions our deck has access to, Dark Witch, which was incredibly lucky considering Keith has access to some of the more powerful defenders on top of the average high attack monsters at this stage of the game. He also has some of the weirdest statted monsters in all of Yu-Gi-Oh!, such as Dark Castle of Illusion with 1930 defense, and Barox with 1380 attack. These are some of the only monsters in Yu-Gi-Oh! History that don't have attack values in the 50 times table, making them very weird anomalies. But combining equips with Dark Witch, we don't really give him a chance to wall up and constantly keep pressure on his life points. This lets us pile up the attackers until we eventually get the victory. Between rounds, we meet a man named Shadi. He explains that for some reason all the Millennium items are gathered here at the final bracket of the tournament. Hearing about our weird dream, Shadi offers to use his Millennium item to allow Yugi to peer into the puzzle and meet with Prince Lyra. We hand Yugi some blank cards and ask for his help in returning to Egypt. How can we do that? More duels, of course! So, on to the next round. Shadi, oh Shadi, what were they thinking when they placed you this late in the game? Shadi has a deck that might give Simon a run for his money on how bad it is. In fact, it kind of became a running joke in the community for a while that losing to Shadi means you should just erase your save game and quit. Mind you, he does have a decent card pool, he just never gets the good stuff, meaning this match always felt like fighting that one 10-year-old at your locals using full power Telement. You're gonna win, but you're not gonna feel good about doing it. Bakura's deck holds some very nasty surprises. On top of the 2000 defense point Mystical Elf and Catapult Turtle, he's capable of dropping 3000 defense beasts like Millennium Shield and Labyrinth Wall. Right now we would need 3 equips just to overcome one of these powerful monsters, Either that or waste the Raigeki to remove it from the field. Every time I saw a defense position monster, I braced to see one of these behemoths, but as luck would have it, we managed to scrape through without ever seeing them. Pegasus here is an incredibly important duelist to most Forbidden Memories runs. We're going to be coming back to fight him many times later on, as he has the potential to drop two of the most potent equipped spells in the game, Bright Castle and Megamorph. But for now, we're looking at a duelist who has above average attack monsters and some decent utility in the form of Raigeki, which he will use if you ever let him keep a monster on the field. But above all, he has access to some of the most powerful cards we've seen yet. Meteor Black Dragon at a whopping 3,500 attack. Thankfully the odds of him dropping this one are incredibly slim, but going forward a lot of duelists will have this card as an option. Isis may not have Meteor Black Dragon, but she has the next best thing. Black Skull Dragon, coming in at 3,200 attack. And unfortunately this time, luck isn't in our corner as she pulls it out turn 1. I desperately try to get enough equips to deal with this threat as she continues to put up an impressive offensive front. One that we just can't recover from in time. And with no Raigekis in sight, this leads to our first loss. Trying again and we get a rather awful hand. Doubly so considering Isis is once again out for blood and drops Black Skull Dragon on turn 1. We dump our entire hand looking for an out, but we're still unable to get enough equipped spells together, and as a result our second match ends eerily in the exact same way as the first. Well, third time's the charm, they say. This time around, Isis is looking a little bit more merciful. I say a bit because she still drops a twin-headed Thunder Dragon on the field. The fact that she can just drop that out of nowhere can tell you things have ramped up a lot. But luckily we get enough cards together to match it on attack. Weirdly though, Isis opts to put her cards into defense position as we grab another equipped spell, which thankfully puts us out of Black Skull Dragon range. It's just a matter of removing a defensive wall at this point, and a Raigeki is very much the thing we needed to do so, letting us go on the offensive. I put a weak monster in defense to bait out an attack so we can keep pressure on our life points, which is a surprisingly effective method considering the AI isn't always this dumb. It even works twice in a row, letting us attack over our turtle, and finally take our well-earned win. Kaiba unsurprisingly has access to the Blue Eyes White Dragon, one of Yu-Gi-Oh's most iconic creatures and a real threat sitting at 3000 attack, the presence of which puts us on the defense immediately. I was real worried here that we were going to have another ISIS situation on our hands, given how this had begun. But luckily for us, we drew into our own little Dragon Slayer, in the form of Dark Witch with 3 equipped spells. Thanks to this, the tide of battle shifts significantly in our favour. Just in case anything happens, I began setting any equipped spells we drew so that it'd be easier to mount a comeback, as we slowly chipped away at his defensive wall. Kaiba even sets up a Millennium Shield in the end, but it's not enough to stop our Twilight Winged Wonder. Eventually we drew into another Dark Witch fusion and boosted with our set equipped spells, letting us steamroll through the last few defense position monsters Kaiba has and begin attacking directly. Within no time, we claim our victory. Having now stolen all the Millennium items, our soul is whisked away in a bright light. The items themselves giving us the ability to travel through time, back to post-apocalyptic Egypt. In the time since, Heishin had murdered the king and queen and stolen the other Millennium items. His band of high mages now ruled from unmarked shrines across the land. Sidine here is about as useless as normal Shadi, but he does send us on the right path to find their locations. Before we search the palace ruins though, I go to the ruins of the duel ground only to find Jono. Turns out there's a hidden duel arena, and we've got a few friends there to catch up with. As we duel Jono again, you may think we're in for an easy time. However, Jono has seen some significant upgrades at this point. Granted, nowhere near the level of the past few duelists, but he does have monsters on average with 1800 attack. On top of which he also has the Red Eyes Black Dragon, Joey's signature monster, at 2400 attack. Add on that our Guardian Stars are weak to some of the more common ones Jono can pull out, and you'll quickly see this isn't going to be a breeze. In fact, this duel involved a lot of back and forward, especially when Jono used Sogen. Thankfully, some of our own creatures get a boost from this field, letting us fight back with minimal equipped spells. While we also do have 2 Raigekis in hand, it's honestly not needed in this duel, as we just keep getting monsters that are able to overcome Jono's brutes, which lets us easily take the win. Teana sadly hasn't had as big an upgrade. While yes, she does have a range of monsters with 1800 attack, she also still has the same fluff she had initially. It's nothing a good old Dark Witch with an equipped spell can't handle. and somehow I doubt Goddess of Whim or Happy Lover is really going to do much in this situation. Granted, she does have access to a decent amount of equip spells, but for the life of me I've never seen her use one. Not really much to say here, sadly. We can just continue to keep up the pressure and it's an easy win. Searching the palace, we find it being guarded by the Mage Soldier. Mage Soldier is a bit of a filler duelist, but it is the swan song for the current version of our deck. We start off rather poorly, but on turn 2 we get into an enchanting mermaid with 4 equipped spells. Nothing this duelist has can even remotely stand up to that, so it's smooth sailing. With him gone, we find an ancient map, which Sadine can use to give us the locations of the 6 shrines. But first things first, it's grinding time. As you can probably tell, our deck hasn't changed one bit since the beginning. So actually beating Heishin is gonna be a bit of an issue. After all, his average attack power is 2800. Luckily, in Free Duel, he doesn't get his home field advantage, but we're still gonna have to take some insane luck to win even once, let alone however many times it's gonna take to get the cards we actually need. Luckily, pretty early on we got a copy of Empress Judge, so we traded in 2 more copies. This makes our chance of success skyrocket, and by the end of this monster grind we had dueled Heishin well over 100 times before moving on to fight Pegasus. Now we're not going to be able to just brute force it this time. Forbidden Memories has 2 styles of win: Power, which we've been doing so far, and Technical, which requires forcing a duelist to run out of cards. This may sound easy, but it isn't. It's a delicate dance of forcing the opponent to fuse, never fusing yourself, and then keeping the field under control while not damaging their life points. Every single tech win takes about 15 minutes. And we're looking for some of the rarer drops, so needless to say, this took hours. But in the end, our deck looks like this. There are 1 or 2 other cards we may go for here or there during the final half, but for the most part this is our final lineup. With the option for us to tackle these shrines in any order, I'm gonna head to the Meadow Shrine first, as it's the one we should have the easiest time with. The Meadow Mage is our first in the Gauntlet of battles that are on home field advantage. Luckily, a lot of our cards get boosted by Sogen, which made this a logical first choice. The Meadow Mage himself is capable of dropping monsters with 2500 plus attack, but with our improved deck that's something we can overcome with a single equip spell most of the time. Other than that, the Meadow Mage is notable for being the source of almost every high-end card in the game. From Dark Magician to Meteor Black Dragon, this guy has it all. High Mage Kepura has a shockingly dangerous deck. His cards range from 1900 to the Mighty Gate Guardian at 3750. This time we seem to have lucked out as it's not in his deck, but he did have the 3500 defensive wall that is Wall Shadow. Granted, that's nothing a Raigeki can't solve. He may be able to take out some of our monsters in the long run, but we always have him on the back foot, letting us take the win and his Millennium item. I took the time to grind out here on Meadow Mage for a Warrior of Tradition to complete our deck upgrades. The Desert Mage has a lot of dinosaur and zombie cards to match with his Wasteland field. Unfortunately, a lot of these tend to be big on defense rather than offense. This lets his duel go by extremely quickly compared to any we've had before. Within no time, his deck is history. The great phallus that is High Mage Martis is definitely compensating for something, as his deck is decidedly weaker than that of Kepura. While he does have Gate Guardian pieces, he doesn't actually have the Gate Guardian, leaving his most powerful card at 2500. Considering the state of our deck, that makes him utter child's play to deal with, leaving us with a rather easy sweep. Our Millennium item quest is interrupted as Jono informs us that Teana has been kidnapped by Seto. He leads us directly towards the area they had taken her. Standing in our way is the Labyrinth Mage, a duelist with a range of good cards, from Twin-Headed Thunder Dragon to the dreaded Gate Guardian. Not reassuring when you've drawn this bad a hand. Lucky for us, his hand seems to be equally as terrible as he just drops a card in defense, but our draws are far from ideal. I said a Raigeki in anticipation of things going wrong, which they did as he fused into a Twin-Headed Thunder Dragon. While I didn't draw into enough equips to overcome the dragon, we did have that Raigeki in waiting, letting us get the upper hand. Add on another equipped spell to our Empress and I'm pretty sure we're in the clear, as he's just setting rather weak defensive cards. I set up a Gemini Elf to give us additional offensive pressure and some much needed chip damage. Then one Megamorph to boost our Gemini Elf to 3900 and we're able to attack the game. Now, for the maze. One that if we make a wrong turn, we'll have to fight Labyrinth Mage over again. The correct path is right, right, left, right. It's here that we find Heishin and Seto holding Teana prisoner. Heishin makes the very smart move to leave his subordinate to deal with us. Seto is back and 2 times stronger. Between Blue Eyes White Dragon, Meteor Black Dragon, and Gate Guardian, Seto has a very good chance of dropping something nasty. But nowhere near as nasty as what we're cooking. A 4600 attack Mystical Sands. Short of being hit by Raigeki or a trap card, there's nothing Seto can do to overcome this. We win! Good day, sir! Having lost in such a quick and decisive way, Seto releases Teana, meaning we can continue to conquer the shrines. I think the bandages on Forest Mage may be impeding his judgment. As compared to his mage brethren, he's unusually weak. Guess it comes with the territory of having insect monsters, but the average attack power in his deck is 1200. And on the fact that his strongest card is only 2000, you begin to question his placement in this game. Granted, he's able to put up a decent defensive wall, and the forest field does make his cards a bit more dangerous, but nowhere near enough for his placement in the game. Needless to say, this was an easy victory. High Mage Anubisius once again feels overall weaker compared to his fellow High Mages. While yes, he does have the monstrously strong, perfectly ultimate Great Moth sitting at 3500 attack, the rest of his deck is full of trash mobs you'd expect to see in the tournament arc. Meaning this duel either goes one of two ways: he stomps you, or you stomp him. There's no other outcomes as far as I've seen. While the Ocean Mage may appear weak at first, that would discredit the fact that he's rather easily able to fuse into Twin-Headed Thunder Dragon with a lot of the cards in his deck. Granted, Twin-Headed Thunder Dragon is starting to get outpaced in terms of how difficult it is to deal with, but it's more than the Forest Mage had going for him. Unfortunately though, this time he was having a rather bad day, so we never got to see it. High Mage Secmeton unfortunately doesn't feel like much of a step up from the Ocean Mage. While he does have cards like Crab Turtle that can get over 3000 on the Umi field, it feels rather underwhelming when other High Mages are dropping monsters that hit for 3500 plus without needing their home field advantage. Add on to that we got a 4100 attack Empress Judge on turn 1, and it means Secmeton can't really do anything to us in the long run. It's just a matter of time until we chip away the last of his life points. The Mountain Mage, apart from his rather impeccable chin, is another that doesn't really have a lot going for him. Just like the Ocean Mage, he has many ways to fuse into Twin-Headed Thunder Dragon, which means overall he's not the worst, but I can't really say he's got anything to worry about either. Best he will usually do is throw out a Parrot Dragon, which at this stage of the game is not too dangerous. High Mage Atenza is not having a good day. While he does have access to Meteor Black Dragon, even that's unable to overcome our supremely jacked up Rose Spectre of Dun with 4500 attack. Then adding insult to injury, we throw out a 3900 attack Neku Gal number 2. This is more than enough to win easily, but I decided to add on a third jacked up monster in the form of another Rose Spectre of Dun with 4000 attack. I have never seen such a one-sided beatdown before, and it makes me feel kinda bad. With all that over, we have all the Millennium items apart from one, so it's time to storm Heishin's base. This begins what the Forbidden Memories community has dubbed the Gauntlet. From here on, we will face 6 duels back to back with no chance to save in between. Losing to one means going all the way back to the first duel again. Needless to say, we need to be prepared for the worst. As such, here's our final deck. Guardian Sebek is our first member of the Gauntlet, and by far the easiest. That's no joke when he's throwing out monsters with an average of 3000 attack. Lucky for us, we hit enough equips turn 1 to confuse his AI as he leaves a monster in attack. This tells me it's his ace card, Metal Zoa. This often happens when the AI plays an ace monster, since for some reason they aren't programmed to allow those in defense position. But that matters very little as this duel is already over. Against Guardian Neku, we start off very poorly as we have to dump our entire hand, and he plays a 3000 attack Summon Skull. We still don't draw into anything of particular note, so we set up Widespread Ruins in hopes of surviving another turn. Thankfully we hit the biggest threat, Summon Skull. Turn 3 we hit enough equips to make our Gemini Elf 3400. Still not a guaranteed win, especially with the awful hands we're having, but if I'm gonna choke, I'd rather it be early on. Our main worry here is Dark Magician, since its Guardian Star trumps our Gemini Elves. Thankfully we have another Widespread Ruin just in case. As our awful hands continue, the worst case scenario is thankfully avoided thanks to our Widespread Ruin, which leaves Neku wide open for a lethal assault. Time once and for all for us to take our revenge on Heishin, but it's not gonna be easy. Turn 1 I set a Widespread Ruin in case of Heishin getting a godly hand, but instead he uses Harpy's Feather Duster, leaving his field open. Playing a 3900 attack Gemini Elf, we eat half of Heishin's life in one go. He sets a face down attack monster. Since this could be one of many things, I used a Dragon Capture Jar to figure it out. Turns out, it was a Gate Guardian. We don't get a particularly good hand in our next draw, so I opted to set a monster in order to reveal whatever Heishin had played next turn, which was a Black Skull Dragon. Too bad we had a 5100 attack Mystical Sands waiting to pimp slap Heishin into the next millennium. It's now that Seto reveals that he was just using Heishin in order to gain access to the Millennium items for himself, so that he may partake in the forbidden power of a pact with an ancient entity. And for that, he's going to need our items. Seto Third is widely considered to be one of, if not the hardest duels in Forbidden Memories, and for good reason. On top of the usual high tier attack monsters, he has the highest attack card in the game, in the form of Blue Eye's Ultimate Dragon at 4500 attack. Since our hand is so bad, we set Widespread Ruins to keep things on an even playing field for the time being, but that will only work for so long. Eventually we need to put some monsters on the field, even if they will be immediately crushed by Meteor B Dragon. Seeing that no Blue Eyes Ultimate had been played yet, it was reasonable to assume that it wasn't in his deck this time, so I went all in with a 4100 attack Mystical Sands. Then next turn I went the extra mile and boosted it to 6100. Since Seto is unlikely to ever set a defense position card, this means we're easily able to chip his life every turn. Or you know, Raigeki for the win. Having beat Seto, we go to destroy the items. However, Heishin takes Seto hostage at knife point and demands the items. Reluctantly, we agree to his demands, as he uses the powers of the items to summon forth Macho Man? Well, Heishin didn't think this through, as he's turned into a card and then snapped like a Slim Jim, leaving this power uncontested. Luckily, the cards we have represent the pact with this ancient entity and offer us one chance to save the world: a card game. Darknite's deck overall is weaker than that of Seto Third, but what he loses in power he makes up for in utility. His highest attack monster is Meteor Black Dragon, but combined with Megamorph, Raigeki and Crush Card Virus, it's more than threatening enough. Even though we can play a 4100 attack Mystical Sands, there's no guarantee that that will be as assuring as it was in the past, especially if we keep drawing dead hands. We set up another Mystical Sands in order to get in some additional chip damage. Luckily enough, Darknite doesn't seem to get a Megamorph, meaning that his Meteor Black Dragon may as well be one big fiery chicken as we take our win. However, Darknite is a very sore loser and pulls out his Common Rider form, Nitemare, before demanding a redo. Nitemare's deck is vastly different to Darknite's. Whereas previously his deck was all utility, now it's pure power. Our deck has once again given us a pretty bad hand, leaving us to set Dragon Capture Jar and then take 3500 to the face. Then we fuse into a Dark Elf and use our Dragon Capture Jar so that we can get in some much needed damage and set up a blockade to prevent lethal damage next turn. We're then hit by another Meteor Black Dragon, wiping our board. But as luck would have it, we draw into Megamorph, letting our Mystical Sands get up to 3600, just barely enough to overcome his monster. From here we're going to need to play very carefully. I debated for a bit before I set another Recoup spell and attacked, taking out his Black Skull Dragon. Then drew enough equipped spells to make a second 3600 attack Mystical Sands, which I used to chip Nitemare's life. At this point, it doesn't really matter what Nitemare sets, as we Raigeki for the final win. Sealing away this ancient evil once and for all, Prince Lyra goes on to unify Egypt, bringing untold prosperity under the title of Yu-Gi-Oh! With that, our job is complete. Now I know what many of you may be asking. Of all the runs, why did I choose to do a female-only run? Well, it's a loving tribute to the person that got me this game all that time ago. My Auntie June, who ignited my love for this game to begin with. But I'd also be remiss if I didn't give my thanks to all the women in my life. To my mother, who's always so supportive of this hobby of mine. To my dear friend Mari, who was taken far too soon. To my friends in the campus Discord, Glutson, Roshi, Mel, who do everything they can to support me. And to my amazing friend and artist Daikonchu, whose art helps breathe some much needed life into all my Pokemon runs, and graciously did the art for this run too. I love you guys. So happy International Women's Day, my friends, and thank you all for watching.